Imagine knowing the exact day you would die. Not next year, not someday, but the exact moment. Would you live differently? Would you stop worrying about things that don't matter? Would you finally become the person you've always wanted to be? For the ancient Stoics, death was not something to fear, it was something to remember, because remembering death teaches us how to live. Today, we'll explore one of the most misunderstood ideas in Stoicism and why it may be the cure for much of the anxiety, stress, and fear that dominate modern life. Every human being is born with a countdown, invisible, silent, relentless, and yet most people spend their entire lives pretending it isn't there. They plan for next year, for retirement, for a future they assume will arrive, but very few stop to consider the one certainty that has accompanied them since birth: death. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern society desperately tries to avoid. The fear of death is not merely one fear among many. It is often the shadow behind all the others. Think about it. Why do people fear losing money? Because they fear losing security. Why do they fear rejection? Because they fear being alone. Why do they fear failure? Because they fear wasting their limited time. Beneath countless anxieties lies a deeper fear. The fear that life is fragile, temporary, uncertain. The Stoics were not the first to notice this, but they were among the few who dared to face it directly. More than 2,000 years ago, philosophers across Greece and Rome observed a truth that modern psychology is only beginning to understand more deeply. Many human behaviors are driven by an unconscious awareness of mortality. Today, psychologists refer to this idea as terror management theory, a theory developed by researchers in the late 20th century, suggesting that much of human behavior is influenced by our awareness that one day we will die. People seek status, build wealth, chase recognition, join groups, defend beliefs, not only because these things provide meaning, but because they help us feel protected from the uncomfortable reality of our mortality. The Stoics would not have been surprised. They had already spent centuries reflecting on the same human condition. Among them was Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in ancient Rome, a philosopher, a statesman, an advisor to emperors. And yet, despite possessing immense wealth and influence, Seneca repeatedly wrote about death, not because he was obsessed with dying, but because he understood something most people ignore: the person who fears death can never be fully free. In his letters, Seneca warned that people behave as though they own unlimited time. They protect their possessions. They protect their money. They protect their reputation. But they waste the one resource that can never be recovered: their days, their attention, their lives. And if Seneca were alive today, he might be shocked by how relevant his warning has become. We live in an age of endless distraction, an age where entire hours disappear inside social media feeds, where people consume more information than any generation in history, yet often feel more lost than ever. The average person worries constantly about the future, a future they cannot control, while ignoring the present moment, the only place life actually exists. This is where Stoicism begins, not with death itself, but with the realization that death gives meaning to life. Because if life lasted forever, nothing would be urgent, nothing would be precious, nothing would truly matter. The value of a sunset comes from the fact that it ends. The value of a conversation comes from the fact that it cannot be repeated exactly. The value of a human life comes from the fact that it is finite. The Stoics understood this deeply, and rather than running from that truth, they built an entire philosophy around it, a philosophy that would teach generations how to live without being controlled by fear. But before we understand how they conquered the fear of death, we must first understand the man who faced it almost every day. A Roman emperor, surrounded by war, disease, loss, and uncertainty, yet remembered as one of history's calmest minds, Marcus Aurelius. Imagine becoming the most powerful man on earth, the ruler of the greatest empire of the ancient world, commanding armies, controlling vast territories, Possessing wealth beyond imagination. Most people believe power eliminates fear, that success creates peace, that status brings certainty. Marcus Aurelius discovered otherwise, because even an emperor cannot negotiate with death. When Marcus Aurelius became emperor of Rome in 161 AD, the empire stood at the height of its power. Its borders stretched across continents, its cities flourished, its influence shaped the known world. From the outside, it appeared unshakable. But beneath the surface, storms were gathering. War erupted along Rome's northern frontiers. Germanic tribes threatened the empire. Military campaigns dragged on for years. Thousands of soldiers never returned home. And then came something even more terrifying. A plague. Historians now believe it may have been smallpox. Known today as the Antonine Plague, it swept through the empire with devastating force. Ancient sources estimate that millions died. Entire towns were emptied. Families vanished. The empire's economy weakened. Fear spread faster than the disease itself. Marcus Aurelius watched it happen, not from a distant palace, but from the center of the crisis. Every day brought reports of death. Every day brought uncertainty. Every day reminded him of a truth most people try to ignore. No amount of power can make a human being immortal. This reality shaped the philosophy that would later fill the pages of his private journal, a journal never intended for publication, a collection of personal reflections written during military campaigns. Today, we know it as the book Meditations, one of the most influential works in human history. Unlike many rulers, Marcus Aurelius did not write to impress others. He wrote to discipline his own mind, to remind himself of truths he feared forgetting. Again and again he returned to one idea. Death is natural. Death is unavoidable. Death should not be feared. In one passage he wrote, "You could leave life right now," a sentence that feels unsettling even today. Yet Marcus was not encouraging despair. He was encouraging clarity. Because when we remember that life is limited, our priorities begin to change. Petty arguments lose importance. Social approval loses importance. Endless comparison loses importance. Suddenly, the things that consume so much of our attention begin to appear small. Marcus understood something many people never realize. Most suffering comes not from death itself, but from pretending death does not exist. People live as though they have endless tomorrows. They postpone dreams, delay difficult conversations, ignore meaningful opportunities, assuming there will always be more time. But time is the one thing no emperor could command. Not Caesar, not Alexander, not Marcus Aurelius, and not us. Modern psychology increasingly supports what the Stoics observed centuries ago. Research shows that people who acknowledge mortality often become more intentional about how they live. They focus on relationships, purpose, personal growth, and experiences that create meaning. Not because death is pleasant, but because awareness creates perspective. Marcus Aurelius practiced this perspective constantly, not to become obsessed with dying, but to become fully engaged in living. Each reminder of mortality became a reminder of gratitude, a reminder of urgency, a reminder to focus on what truly mattered. And perhaps that is why his words still resonate today. Because despite all our technology, our fears remain remarkably similar. We still worry about the future. We still seek certainty. We still struggle to accept what we cannot control. The difference is that Marcus faced these questions every day, surrounded by war, disease, loss, and the collapse of certainty. Yet he discovered something extraordinary. The acceptance of death does not make life darker. It makes life brighter, and nowhere is that lesson more needed than in the modern world. A world that spends enormous energy trying to avoid thinking about mortality altogether. If death is one of the few certainties in life, why do we spend so much energy avoiding it? Why do we avoid talking about it? Why do we fear even thinking about it? The answer is not new. Human beings have always struggled with mortality. But modern society has perfected the art of distraction. For most of human history, death was visible. Children grew up seeing grandparents age. Families cared for the sick at home. Wars, disease, famine, loss. Death was not hidden from daily life. It was understood as part of existence itself. The ancient Stoics lived in that reality. They did not need reminders that life was fragile. Every epidemic, every battle, every funeral reinforced the lesson. Life is temporary. But something changed. As civilization advanced, death gradually disappeared from view. Hospitals replaced homes. Funeral services became industries. The elderly became isolated from younger generations, and mortality became something discussed less and less. Not because it became less real, but because it became less visible. Today, most people encounter death through screens. Movies, television, video games, news headlines, thousands of fictional deaths, thousands of distant tragedies, yet very little genuine reflection. We see death constantly, but rarely contemplate it, and this creates a strange contradiction. We live further from death than most generations in history, yet we often fear it more, because what remains unknown often becomes terrifying. The Stoics understood that fear grows in darkness. Anything we refuse to examine gains power over us. This principle applies to anxiety, to failure, to uncertainty, and especially to death. The less we think about mortality, the more unconsciously it controls us. This hidden influence appears everywhere, in the obsession with youth, in the fear of aging, in the endless pursuit of status, in the desperate need to stay relevant. Modern culture constantly sends the same message. Stay young, look younger, act younger. Hide the passage of time, as if aging itself were a failure. But the Stoics would have viewed this differently. To age was not a tragedy. It was a privilege. Every wrinkle represented survival. Every gray hair represented experience. Every year represented time that many people never received. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that everything in nature changes, everything grows, everything declines, everything ends, and because it ends, it possesses beauty. Consider a flower. Its beauty exists partly because it fades. Consider a sunset. Its beauty exists because it disappears. And consider your own life. Its meaning exists because it is limited. Yet modern society rarely teaches this lesson. Instead, it teaches accumulation. More money, more possessions, more followers, more achievements. As if quantity could somehow protect us from mortality, but no amount of success changes the fundamental truth. Every human being shares the same destination. The billionaire, the emperor, the celebrity, the philosopher, the worker, the student. The same ending awaits them all. This realization may sound uncomfortable, but for the Stoics, it was liberating. Because once you accept what cannot be avoided, you stop wasting energy fighting reality, and something remarkable happens. You begin living more honestly. You become less concerned with appearances, less obsessed with comparison, less controlled by the opinions of strangers, because you finally understand something that most people spend their lives avoiding. Time is finite, and that fact changes everything. The Stoics called this awareness wisdom. Modern psychology often calls it acceptance, but both point toward the same truth. The person who learns to face mortality discovers how to truly live, and nowhere is this lesson more powerful than in one of the most famous Stoic practices ever recorded, a practice that transformed fear into clarity and mortality into purpose, a practice known by two simple Latin words, Memento Mori. Two simple words, Memento Mori. Remember that you will die. At first glance, the phrase sounds dark, almost disturbing. Why would anyone want to think about death every day? Why would philosophers willingly focus on something most people spend their lives trying to avoid? The answer reveals one of the most powerful psychological tools ever discovered. Because Memento Mori was never about death, it was always about life. The Stoics understood something that modern society often forgets. What we remember shapes how we live, and when we forget that life is finite, we begin to waste it. We postpone important conversations. We delay meaningful goals. We assume there will always be another opportunity, another year, another chance. But the Stoics trained themselves to think differently. Each morning could be their last. Each conversation could be their last. Each sunset could be their last. Not as a source of fear, but as a source of gratitude. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. In his private writings, he reminded himself again and again that every day was borrowed, not owned, borrowed. A gift that could be returned at any moment, and that perspective transformed everything. Suddenly, trivial problems became smaller. Insults lost their power. Delays became less frustrating. The opinions of strangers became less important, because when measured against the reality of mortality, most daily worries appear insignificant. Modern psychology has begun to uncover why this practice can be so effective. Research suggests that people who consciously reflect on mortality often become more aligned with their deepest values. They stop living automatically. They become more intentional, more grateful, more focused. They begin asking different questions. Not, how do I look to others? But, am I living according to what truly matters? Not, how can I avoid discomfort? But, how can I use my limited time wisely? This shift changes everything. Because most people live as though they have unlimited tomorrows. The Stoics lived as though today mattered. And that difference creates urgency, not panic. Urgency, the kind that inspires action. Think about your own life. How many dreams have been postponed? How many opportunities delayed? How many conversations left unfinished? How many goals pushed into an imaginary future? The future is a dangerous place because it creates the illusion of abundance, abundant time, abundant chances, abundant tomorrows. But reality offers no such guarantees. Seneca wrote extensively about this illusion. In his work on the shortness of life, he argued that life is not actually short. We simply waste much of it. We waste it chasing distractions, seeking approval, accumulating things we do not need, fighting battles that do not matter. And then one day, we wonder where the years went. Memento Mori interrupts that cycle. It forces us to confront a question many people spend their entire lives avoiding. If today were your last day, would you be satisfied with how you are living? Not with how much money you have, not with how many followers you have, not with how much status you have accumulated, but with how you are spending the irreplaceable currency of your life. Your time. This is why Memento Mori is not pessimistic. It is liberating because once you accept that life is limited, you stop acting as though it is not. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop postponing what matters. You stop treating time as if it were infinite. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to appreciate what is already in front of you. The people you love, the opportunities you have, the ordinary moments that will never come again. For the Stoics, remembering death was not a way of preparing to die. It was a way of learning how to live. And in a world obsessed with avoiding mortality, that lesson may be more valuable than ever. But there remains one final question. If death is unavoidable and life is temporary, what gives life its value in the first place? The Stoics believed they knew the answer, and it changes everything. Imagine for a moment that you could live forever. No deadlines, no endings, no final chapter. An endless existence stretching infinitely into the future. At first, it sounds appealing, perhaps even comforting. But the Stoics believed something unexpected. If life never ended, life would lose its value. Think about the things you cherish most: a sunset, a childhood memory, a conversation with someone you love, a season of your life that can never return. What gives these moments their meaning? It is not their permanence. It is their impermanence. The fact that they cannot last forever is precisely what makes them precious. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He observed that everything in nature follows the same pattern: birth, growth, decline, transformation. Nothing remains unchanged. Nothing remains forever. Not empires, not wealth, not fame. not even the people we love most. And rather than seeing this as a tragedy, the Stoics saw it as a gift, because limitation creates value. Consider gold. If gold were as common as sand, it would have little worth. Consider time. Unlike gold, time is even more valuable, because once it is spent, it can never be recovered. Yet modern society teaches the opposite. People carefully track their money, they protect their investments, they monitor their bank accounts, but they rarely monitor how they spend their lives. Hours disappear scrolling, days disappear worrying, years disappear chasing things that never truly mattered. And then comes the realization. The resource they protected least was the most valuable one they possessed. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." 2,000 years later, his words feel more relevant than ever. Today, entire industries compete for human attention. Every notification, every advertisement, every algorithm, fighting for the most valuable asset you own, your time, because attention is life. Where your attention goes, your life follows. And this is where Stoicism becomes surprisingly practical. The Stoics did not simply ask, "How long will I live?" They asked, "How well am I using the life I have?" This question changes everything. Suddenly, success looks different. Success is no longer measured only by wealth or status or recognition. It is measured by alignment. Are you spending your days on what truly matters? Are your actions consistent with your values? Are you living deliberately? Or merely reacting? Modern psychology increasingly supports this perspective. Studies consistently show that meaningful relationships, purpose, contribution, and personal growth create lasting well-being far more effectively than material accumulation alone. The Stoics understood this centuries before scientific research existed, not because they had laboratories, but because they carefully observed human nature. They noticed that people who chased external validation remained dissatisfied, and people who focused on character developed resilience. One path created endless hunger, the other created peace. This does not mean money is unimportant. The Stoics were not opposed to wealth. In fact, Seneca himself was incredibly wealthy. But they believed wealth was a tool, not a purpose, a servant, not a master, because eventually every possession must be left behind, every title, every achievement, every fortune. Only one thing remains: the way you lived, the choices you made, the person you became. This is why the Stoics viewed mortality differently from most people. Death was not the enemy. Meaninglessness was. A life spent unconscious, a life spent distracted, a life spent waiting. That was the true tragedy, not death itself. And perhaps this is the final lesson Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus wanted to leave behind. Do not wait for life to begin. It is already happening. This moment, this breath, this day will never come again. And that is exactly why it matters. There is a question that every human being must eventually face. Not whether we will die, but whether we truly lived. The Stoics spent centuries contemplating mortality, not because they were fascinated by death, but because they understood something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Death is not what steals life from us. Unconscious living does. A person can live 80 years and never truly be present, never truly appreciate a sunrise, never truly listen to the people they love, never truly pursue what matters. And yet another person may live far fewer years while experiencing life more deeply, more intentionally, more courageously. The difference is not measured in time, it is measured in awareness. Marcus Aurelius knew this. Each day he ruled an empire that could collapse. Each day he faced war, disease, loss, and uncertainty. Yet he returned again and again to the same lesson. Do not act as though you have 10,000 years to live, because none of us do. The tragedy is not that life is short. The tragedy is believing we have unlimited time, and then discovering we do not. This is why the Stoics practiced Memento Mori. Not to become obsessed with death, but to become devoted to life, to wake up, to stop postponing, to stop waiting, to stop living as spectators of our own existence. Because the truth is simple. One day, you will experience your final sunrise, your final conversation, your final opportunity to tell someone you love them, and you will not know when those moments arrive. None of us will. That is why this moment matters. This breath matters. This day matters. Not because it is permanent, but because it is not. The Stoics believed that when we fully accept mortality, fear begins to lose its grip, the future loses some of its power, regret loses some of its weight, comparison loses its importance, and what remains is something extraordinary. Clarity, the clarity to focus on what matters, the clarity to value time more than possessions, the clarity to choose character over status, purpose over distraction, presence over fear. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus left behind. You do not control how long you live. You do not control when your story ends. But you do control how you use the pages that remain. So the question is not whether death is coming. It is. The question is, what will you do before it arrives? If this video made you reflect on your life, subscribe to Timeless Philosophers, because some lessons are too important to be forgotten, and some truths remain timeless.